Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to do somewhat of a brief overview of clinical trials and medical experimentation. So what I noticed is there's a lot of confusion surrounding the current emergency use authorization, or I like to call them the EUA injections, simply because of censorship purposes. So I wanted to discuss that, like whether they are experiments and the differences between emergency use authorization and FDA approval. So I believe that this information is important whether or not you have gotten the injections, because boosters are being considered for the winter. So I will be doing a quick overview of the following. What is medical experimentation and human subjects research? What is a clinical trial? So we'll be going over the stages of a clinical trial. Have the EUA injections completed clinical trials? And if not, what stage are they in? And the differences between FDA approval at EUA and FDA approval. And the last thing I wanted to discuss is an overview of the EUA injection waivers. I'll be talking about that, and we'll begin. So a quick overview of my background. I am not a medical doctor, so what I'm about to say is not medical advice. This video is for information purposes only. However, I conduct human subjects research, so this subject is important to me. So as always, I encourage you to take the time to look into the information for yourself to make sure that what is said is accurate, to consult your healthcare provider, consult your own medical condition, and to ultimately make the decision that is right for you. So at the end, I will be posting my sources, and in the comments, I will be, posting my sources so you can take a look through them, as well as any other sources that you see fit. So question 1 is, what is medical experimentation and human subjects research? So medical experimentation is defined as testing and evaluation of a new drug or a procedure on a human person in order to gain generalizable knowledge that can be used for various purposes. In its accepted form, such as experimentation that is conducted on willing human subjects, it is used for the purposes of advancing the curative or preventative role of medicine. In its prohibited form, which is done in connections with genocide or crimes against humanity, is conducted without the consent of the individuals tested and for purposes that may purport to have positive value for medical science, such as finding a vaccine against smallpox, or for the misuse of medicine, such as, and this again comes from Harvard University, such as learning how to keep a prisoner from dying under torture in order to continue the acts of torture. Human subjects research is defined according to 45 CFR 46, which is Code of Federal Regulations. A human subject is a living individual about whom an investigator, whether professional or student conducting research, obtains information or biospecimens through intervention or interaction with the individual and uses, studies, or analyzes information or biospecimens, or obtains, uses, analyzes, or generates identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens. All right, so moving on, what is a clinical trial? A clinical trial is a research study in which one or more of the human subjects are prospectively assigned to one or more interventions, which may include placebo or control, to evaluate the effects of those interventions on health-related or behavioral outcomes. A clinical trial is a specific type of experiment designed to establish the effectiveness of a medical intervention. And so a clinical trial typically has 4 phases, and this serves to test various parameters of the drug. So you'll notice as we discuss each phase and its purposes, you'll notice that they tend to increase in sample size, which is the amount of subjects that are used, the length of the study increases, the purpose of the phase changes, and the amount of viable drug candidates decrease. So all of this information is taken from the FDA's website. So phase 1 is the part of the experiment where there are 20 to 100 healthy volunteers or people with a disease or condition, and the length of the study is about several months. So the purpose of the study is to determine the safety and dosage of a drug. And this includes interactions that the drug has with the body, how much of the drug can be tolerated in the body, and acute short-term side effects of the drug. And so I want to emphasize the length of this study because in order to determine acute or short-term effects of a drug, this typically takes about several months of study. And I want you to keep that in mind as we go through the current drugs that we have under EUA. Phase 2 is where we have study participants that have the disease or condition. And in the case of these injections, the volunteers can be healthy. So this kind of introduces a problem because in the initial clinical trials that led to emergency use authorization, the subjects that were tested were healthy. However, the data that we have suggests that those who are most susceptible to severe C19 illness and the deaths that happen tend to be those who have pre-existing conditions, so typically around 2 to 3 comorbidities. And so how generalizable would this knowledge be to them? And that is something that you can determine for yourself. But the length of study is typically several months to 2 years. And the purpose of the phase is to determine the efficacy and side effects. And this also includes the collection of individual safety data, refining the research question, developing research methods, and designing new phase 3 research protocols. So approximately 33% of drugs move on to the next phase, which is phase 3. So phase 3 includes 300 to 3,000 volunteers who have the disease or condition. The length of study is about 1 to 4 years. And the purpose of this phase is to determine the efficacy and monitor adverse reactions. This determines if the product benefits a specific population and provides the most safety data due to the size and duration of the trial. And this typically detects long-term or rare side effects. So I have a couple of important notes here. Pfizer's longest study, which is the 6-month study, was just produced July 28th. So remember, according to the timelines that we were given, we should have over a year's worth of data by now. And also another important thing to keep in mind is that we will not have data longer than 6 months regarding the safety and efficacy of, well, any of the injections, but I'll explain why for each. For the Pfizer injection, the subjects in the control group were unblinded after 6 months. So that basically means that the placebo group was offered the Pfizer mRNA injection. So therefore, unless Pfizer is able to recruit additional subjects and start monitoring them from the beginning, we will not be able to accurately assess the safety and efficacy of their injections past 6 months because, unfortunately, this bias was introduced. Another issue is that Moderna has indicated that the patients who receive the placebo in Part 3A of their study will be unblinded so that they receive 2 doses of the mRNA injections in Part 3B of their study, which effectively, again, biases the results and raises questions on how we will be able to collect data of the long-term safety and efficacy of these injections if the control groups are being eliminated. Additionally, J&J is doing the same thing. So they are also unblinding their placebo group after 6 months and offering them a dose of the adenovirus injection at the 6-month mark. So data past the 6-month mark will be biased unless a cohort is recruited and followed for an extended period of time of 1 year or more. And these subjects, of course, would have to be blinded. So they would have to be given a placebo, and they can't know who received what. So another important note is that the pharmaceutical companies are supposed to have this data before injecting people with their products. So a 6-month study should have been conducted before releasing the drug to the population, ideally. Both Pfizer and Moderna have released their 6-month studies months after many in the general population received their injections, which to me does raise some ethical concerns. And the last note on phase 3 is approximately 25 to 30% of drugs move on to phase 4. So for phase 4, several thousand volunteers who have the disease or condition of interest are typically enrolled. I guess in this case it would be healthy volunteers because the purpose is to prevent disease. So the purpose of this phase is to determine the safety and efficacy. So this is more of a long-term safety and efficacy study. And this monitoring is typically conducted after the research has been released to market to determine long-term risks, benefits, and side effects of using a drug. A drug may be withdrawn in phase 4 if any serious safety concerns are observed. This phase is typically not as controlled as other phases. So, for example, earlier phases in the clinical trial may involve restrictions in the diet, drugs, or other lifestyle factors, while stage 4 tends to have less or no restrictions in these aspects. Therefore, more variability may be introduced to the results, and that may lead to safety signals that would not have been detected in the previous phases of the trial. So, by now you may be aware that safety and efficacy is continuously monitored throughout the various phases of the trial because these profiles may change based on the condition of the individual patient and the characteristics of the population being tested. So, important notes on this particular phase of the trial is not all studies in phase 4 have post-market approval. So that means that they are FDA approved. And this is true for the current emergency use authorized injections. Surveillance of a drug continues even after approval because the safety events that were not picked up in the first couple of months to years may be picked up later on. So can we really ever say that a drug is completely safe and effective for everyone? And essentially, phase 4 does not end. And phase 4 is considered a real-time test. So this is where those conducting the study do not have control over the variables that they would have during phases 1, 2, and 3. And so this limits the generalizability. Well, technically, it kind of expands it because now you're using more various subject types. But anyway, especially when certain exclusions are made during the initial trials to protect vulnerable populations. So, for example, you'll see in some of these clinical trials, actually all of them, pregnant women, children, and prisoners were excluded from the initial trials. And up to this point, pregnant women haven't been evaluated yet, to my knowledge, in any of these trials. So, but unfortunately, they've also been receiving, the injections when the initial clinical trials did not include pregnant women. So this is another area of concern. So after phase 3, the FDA is supposed to review the data for the first 3 phases to make a determination about whether the drug or the device should be approved. So question 3 is, have the EUA injections completed clinical trials? And if not, what stage are they in? So these medical products are unique because typically a medical product has to complete one stage before moving on to the next. So this helps to weed out drug candidates that demonstrate safety and efficacy concerns before moving on to the next phase. However, for these injections, these phases are being complete in parallel. None of these injections have completed clinical trials yet. So when you look at the websites, you'll see 2 completion dates, the primary completion date and the study completion date. The primary completion date is for the primary outcomes that the study would like to measure. In this case, the occurrence of moderate to severe COVID disease. The study completion date not only measures the primary outcomes of interest, but measures of other outcomes of interest, such as the secondary outcomes defined in the clinical trials and adverse reactions. So we'll be just going through each company and seeing where they are in their clinical trials. So Pfizer is currently completing stage 2, 3, and 4 at the same time. So stage 2 and 3 will began April 20th, 2020, and will end May 2nd, 2023. So we have about 1 year and 9 months until Pfizer completes its clinical trial and can submit their results from phase 1, 2, and 3 to the FDA for full approval, assuming they're keeping their timelines. But of course, we are hearing, about boosters and improving before this time is complete. So remember, in phase 2, a researcher is testing for efficacy and side effects of the drug. And in phase 3, a researcher is testing for efficacy, adverse reactions, and long-term effects of the drug. Remember, in phase 4, the risks and benefits and side effects of the drug are still being monitored. So given that Pfizer is still in the middle of testing for safety, efficacy, adverse reactions, and long-term effects, can Pfizer truly make the claim that their drug is safe and effective? Has the Pfizer injection been approved by the FDA? And so I went to Pfizer's website, and this is what they say. The Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine has not been approved or licensed by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, but has been authorized for emergency use by the FDA under an emergency use authorization to prevent C-19 for use in individuals 12 years of age and older. The emergency use of this product is only authorized for the duration of the emergency declaration unless ended sooner. So on to Moderna. Moderna is in stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, all at the same time. Moderna began clinical trials as of March 26, 2020. Phase 1 will be completed November 22nd, 2022, so that will be in about 1 year. Phase 2 will be completed November 22nd, 2021, and Phase 3 will be completed October 22nd, 2022. So if these dates seem unusual to you, it is because they are. So somehow Phase 2 and Phase 3 are being completed before Phase 1. So I personally am not sure if these are typos, but this is currently what clinicaltrials.gov is reporting. So just as a reminder, Phase 1 tests the safety and dosage of the drug. Phase 2 tests the efficacy and side effects of the drug. Phase 3 tests the efficacy, adverse reactions, and long-term effects of the drug. And Phase 4 is continuously monitoring the risks, benefits, and side effects of the drug. So given that Moderna is still in the middle of testing for safety, efficacy, long-term effects, and appropriate dosage of their injections, can Moderna truly make the claim that their drug is safe and effective? Has Moderna's injection been improved? And this is from Moderna's website. The Moderna COVID-19 injection has not been approved or licensed by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, but has been authorized for emergency use by the FDA under emergency use authorization to prevent C-19 disease for use in individuals 18 years of age and older. There is no FDA-approved injection to prevent COVID-19. The EUA for the Moderna C-19 injection is in effect for the duration of the C-19 EUA declaration justifying emergency use of the product unless declaration is terminated or authorization is revoked sooner. So now on to J&J. J&J is also in Phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, all at the same time. The estimated study completion date for Phase 1 and 2 is February 2nd, 2024. The Phase 3 is estimated to be completed January 2nd, 2023, which is about 1 year before Phase 1 and Phase 2 will be completed. So again, not sure if there is a typo there, but apparently Phase 1 and 2 will be completed after Phase 3. So again, as a reminder, Phase 1 tests the safety and dosage of the drug. Phase 2 tests the efficacy and side effects of the drug. Phase 3 tests the efficacy, adverse reactions, and long-term effects of a drug. And of course, you have Phase 4. So if the J&J injection is still in phase 1, 2, 3, and 4, can J&J make the claim that their drug is safe and effective? Was the J&J injection approved by the FDA? And this is from the J&J website. The Janssen C19 injection has not been approved or licensed by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, but has been authorized by FDA through an emergency use authorization for active immunization to prevent C19 disease in individuals 18 years of age and older. There is no FDA-approved injection to prevent C19. So what is the difference between EUA and the FDA approval? So I'll just be reading the definitions to you. The difference between the EUA is that under Section 564 of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, when the Secretary of the HHS declares that an emergency use authorization is appropriate, the FDA may authorize unapproved medical products or unapproved uses of approved medical products to be used in an emergency to diagnose, treat, or prevent serious or life-threatening diseases or conditions caused by chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, which is also known as CBRN, threat agents, when certain criteria are met, including that there are no adequate approved and available alternatives. And I'd like to highlight that last point because there is a debate. Is that true? Is there really no other adequate, approved, or available alternatives? And I think, in the scientific community, that's been a debate. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of censorship, but I would say that is very much up in the air at this time. FDA approval is when the data on the drug's effect have been reviewed by the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, and the drug is determined to provide benefits that outweigh its known and potential risks for the intended population. They look at the target condition, compare the proposed treatment to the existing treatment, examine the clinical data for benefits and risks to determine if the benefits outweigh the risks, and strategies for managing risks associated with the treatment, because all treatments, regardless of whether they are injections or not, come with inherent risks. And I think another important thing to keep in mind is that unlike certain medical interventions, this is being proposed for everyone regardless of your personal risk factor. And so this definitely needs to be evaluated as we continue to move on. So the next point is an overview of the EUA injection waivers. So if you have received 1 or 2 EUA injections, you should have received a consent form. This is because if you have received an EUA injection from the date when it was first released up until now, based off of the evidence that I presented to you, and I'll also put the links in the comment section, you are now enrolled in a clinical trial and therefore should have been informed of the benefits and risks of your participation. So I will be reviewing 3 different consent forms. Yours may have looked a little bit different depending on where you've gotten your injection, but the essence of it should be the same. So this is according to the ANOVA consent form. I understand that the common risks associated with the C19 injection include but are not limited to, and they give a whole bunch of different side effects that you might experience. I understand that the injection may cause a severe allergic reaction, anaphylaxis, which some of you already may be familiar with. But here's the most important part. I understand that these may not be all the side effects of the C19 injection, as injection is still being studied in clinical trials. I also understand that it's not possible to predict all the possible side effects or complications which could be associated with the injection. I understand that the long-term side effects, and remember we were talking about stage 3 and why it's important for it to at least be 1 year or longer. I understand that the long-term side effects or complications of this injection are not known at this time. So the third paragraph goes into more detail, but basically says that you cannot hold Innova or its affiliates responsible for anything that happens to you. So essentially what they're saying is that the cost of your decision is on you. And this is why it's really important to make sure that you're fully informed and you make the best decision for you. So according to the Intermed consent form, it says that I understand that this injection is authorized for use under emergency use authorization issued by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Under EUA, the FDA may allow the use of unapproved medical products or unapproved uses of approved medical products in an emergency to diagnose, treat, or prevent serious or life-threatening diseases or conditions when certain statutory criteria have been met, including that there are no adequate or approved and available alternatives. And as I said before, this is under heavy debate and scrutiny right now. So it is unclear how long any of the potential benefits of this injection may last. Additional research is needed to answer this question. Receiving this injection does not eliminate the need for masking, social distancing, and hand hygiene. And unfortunately, I do think that public health officials haven't communicated this as effectively as I wish they had, because it seemed like a lot of people had the impression that these interventions would go away, and of course, as we can see, they have not. So I may still become ill with C19 and may be able to transmit the virus to other individuals. And this injection has not been studied on individuals who are pregnant or breastfeeding, and it is recommended that I discuss injection with my provider prior to receiving the injection. I understand and acknowledge record of this injection administration to me. And this part is really important. I understand and acknowledge record of this injection administration to me will be reported to the state and or federal regulatory bodies in compliance with reporting for inventory management and use of national stockpile injection supply. I agree and authorize that my injection record will be shared with my primary care physician and include my healthcare records for continuity of care purposes. And this part is especially important. I further agree and authorize my injection record to be shared for quality of care, patient safety, and other research purposes. And last one is, the Walgreens waiver. So there are a couple of others, but actually many others, but I can't go through all of them. But this one basically says that it is not possible to understand all the complications or side effects associated with receiving the injections. So this allows for the those administering the injection to be held harmless, and also allows for the release of your injection information to state officials, federal organizations, and their respective designees. So who exactly are these people? I don't know. So some of the waivers make it clear that your records and therefore your outcomes will be tracked for research purposes, which is something that is done in a clinical trial. And also keep in mind that under the EUA, you cannot hold the manufacturers liable for severe side effects, and chances are the government will not compensate you if you are injured by this product either now or develop a condition related to this product in the future, and which is also an argument for why long-term studies are so essential. So in conclusion, regardless of what you decide to do, it is important to note that the EUA injections are currently still in the investigational stage to evaluate safety, efficacy, dosage, and adverse events, and therefore qualify as a medical experiment, in my opinion. My opinion is that the data is not sufficient to provide long-term safety, efficacy data, and unfortunately may never be, because Moderna, J&J, and Pfizer have unblinded their placebo group and offered them the injections. So to gather unbiased data, they would have to recruit a brand new cohort, keep the cohort blinded to their intervention, and follow them over an extended period of time, so at least a year or more. The longest studies that we have on these injections is 6 months, And long-term studies are critical to understanding the potential for adverse reactions, especially if they are specific to certain populations more than others, and the development of chronic diseases. So injections on average take 10 to 15 years to develop. And it's also important to note that cancers also take years to develop. So the shortest time frame I've seen for a cancer to develop is pancreatic cancer, which takes 7 years on average to develop. I'm not sure if there are any others that take shorter, but that's the shortest one that I've seen. However, cancer can take 10 years or more to develop. Autoimmune disease takes on average 4.5 years to diagnose, so it's critical to have the time to do a thorough evaluation of the medical product being developed and long-term monitoring. So years of monitoring of the subject to ensure that there aren't any links between the medical product and the disease. And that could have been detected if they were monitored for a sufficient length of time. And it's also important to know that even for those medications that have been approved, such as Vioxx, unfortunately, it took 5 years before it was discovered that Vioxx was leading to the deaths of individuals, and unfortunately 50,000 people ended up dying because of that. And I think, was it thalidomide? Yes, thalidomide was another one, which unfortunately led to disfiguring of children, and unfortunately it took 5 years. So all I'm saying is that it takes time to really discover what a pharmaceutical intervention can do, and therefore these long-term studies are critical before distribution. So another important part that I feel like hasn't been thoroughly emphasized is that some of these authors have conflicts of interest. For example, just looking through the conflicts of interest for the Moderna studies, some of the authors either received grants from Moderna, Pfizer, J&J, and the NIH, have family members that own stocks in Moderna, work at Moderna, or were listed as inventors on the mRNA injection patents. So that may influence how the results are communicated to you as the general public. And also remember that the NIH is a co-owner of the Moderna mRNA injection patent. So anyone with affiliations with the NIH may also have a conflict of interest. And so they do have, an interest in promoting, their product. So ultimately, I would argue that if a patient was not aware that the injection was still in the experimental stages and was not given full informed consent regarding their personal benefit and risk factors, or is being coerced into taking something that they're not comfortable with taking, the research code of ethics, such as the Nuremberg Code, are being violated, and this matter needs further investigation. So the whole point of this is not necessarily to tell you what you should or should not take, but it is to give, another side of the story, and to really encourage you all to look at, the data for yourself. Look at, as I said, conflicts of interest. Look at clinicaltrials.gov. Look at the information for yourself and see if what you're being told on the news or on TV, models the actual information. So with that, I am finished, and I hope this has been informative to you.